stone cold amazes me week in and week out. And I know it's a good system, and I know he's a great route runner, and I know Mahomes puts it on him every single time. But how the hell that guy ever gets open, knowing full well that he is their first choice, second choice, and third choice to throw to on any given play? How the hell do you not double team him? I guess it's against, you just don't double team guys every single play. But I think about it with him in Kansas City this week.
Yeah, I mean, well, great players tend to figure out a way, and he's a great player. He's a Hall of Fame player. And it's easier said than done. Sure, they're going to double team him. And everybody double teams him. Zach, by the way, is logging in right now, so hopefully we get him in a couple minutes. But and there he is, popping up. Good to see you, Zach Berman. Welcome back to the program. Good to see Zach. First time moving over from the Athletic to allphilly.com. Still doing the same tremendous job covering the Eagles. We were talking about the self-scout, Zach. So if I'm putting you on this coaching staff, you're Nick Sirianni's right-hand man. What does your self-scout tell you first?
Well, first off, thanks for having me on. Sorry, I'm late. Tardiness is like a big pet peeve of mine. So
well, that's why I was worried. I know.
Yeah. But actually, if I was Sirianni's right hand man, I probably would be showing up like 2-3 minutes late to something too. So my self scout, what would it tell me is, frankly, that their receivers are outstanding, and there's calls to run the ball, there's calls to spread the ball around. There's no rule against throwing the ball to A.J. Brown more. There's no rule against throwing the ball to Devontae Smith more. So that would be the big thing that jumps out is take advantage of generational talents at wide receiver. I mean, I think back, and you know this well, John, like we've covered teams when Travis Fulgham and Greg Ward were the top options, right? Now they have A.J. Brown has over 1,000 yards in week 9. It is absurd to think about. So that'd be one thing. And then on the defensive side of the ball, they need to get some semblance of stability in the secondary. And I think Bradley Roby will be a big part of that. When Roby's healthy, and from what I understand, he'll be after the bye here, having him in the slot, it'll allow you to try to get continuity with Slay and Bradbury on the outside, Kevin Byard, Reed Blankenship at safety, and Roby in the slot. And in that group there, you have experienced players who can communicate well, who know situational football, and I think that'll be really beneficial for the group.
Byard was the key leading up to the trade deadline addition from Howie Roseman, who always seems to know what strings to pull leading up to it. Okay, the first 2 weeks, certainly got to cut him some slack, joining a new team, learning new teammates, and Eagles defense being what it is, which is so based on communication, and he just not being used to playing with these guys. Week off, another week. Should the expectation level be raised on Byard going into this game against the Chiefs?
Sure. Based on the track record, Jody, that's definitely the case, right? That you need to expect him to be a relatively high-level player. That said, you always need to recognize this when you trade for a veteran. It's not as if Howie Roseman was the only one who knew that you could get Kevin Byard, right? Like there was this big applause for getting him at the price that they did. The league knew he was available. This was what the market said he was worth. It was the same thing, with Robert Quinn last year and Golden Tate, and you go through all these trade deadline acquisitions. So there's a part of you that has to say that the league saw a 30-year-old safety and recognized that this is the value. So it needs to be kept in perspective that you might not be getting the player from 2 seasons ago, but I still think he's certainly an upgrade over Terrell Edmonds, and that will come to bear over the next few weeks.
First of all, Zach, to rewind to your self-scout, I want to give you credit because I think too many people don't focus on the good. They focus on the bad. Like everybody's saying, the back seven's got to settle down. You mentioned with Bradley Roby, Kevin Byard getting more comfortable. A lot of people talk about the running game. And to me, the traditional running game, Jalen Hurts not being that +1 because of the knee injury or not being as effective threatening the opposing defenses, I think it made it really hard for the Eagles to run the football. I don't think they're particularly good running the football in a traditional fashion. But so what? If you're that good on the outside, this is what I love. I argued with the Dallas Cowboys. They didn't throw the ball to CD Lamb enough. And he caught, I think, 11 passes for whatever. The Eagles couldn't do anything with him. There's no rule that says you can't stop A.J. Brown. Keep feeding him the football. I love that thought process. And I think the Eagles should get there at least until Jalen Hurts is feeling more comfortable and people are threatened by his presence in the running game again.
Yeah, I agree with you there, and I see this in the NBA all the time, right? In terms of usage rate, if a player's scoring, keep giving him the ball. Keep letting him score. That's the objective. I remember talking to someone after the Lions game, Week 1 last year, AJ Brown's first game. I think he had 16 targets, and someone said to me, that's a high number of targets. I said, he caught 11 of them, right? It should have been 20 targets based on how successful they were when they threw to him. But as far as the running game, Cam Jurgens, I do think will have an impact there. But the biggest thing is Jalen Hurts. The running game is built around Jalen Hurts. I've heard John's line over the years that it's a Jalen Hurts based offense. And when defenses need to recognize that Jalen can tuck and run, that there's that +1 in the running game, it simply changes the math. And they haven't had that in recent weeks.
All right, ZB, if you're buying into this, if a lot is good, go with more because it's even better. Are you putting Hassan Reddick and Josh Sweat out there even more than they have? Because their loads have increased to previous years. They're both killing it. BG had a big game last week, more power to him. But the other Nolan Smith and Derek Barnett's of the world haven't contributed a whole hell of a lot. Are you giving the Eagles 2 stud defensive pass rushers even more snaps over the second half of the season?
That's when I would say no on. I mean, if you give them more snaps, they'd be playing every snap basically because their playing time is much higher than you typically see for a rotational position. And you do want them both fresh for January and February. And it is a position where you're playing 4 guys, 5 guys. I think you need to see more from Nolan Smith in the backstretch of the schedule. He's the number 30 overall pick in the draft. He has athletic gifts. We saw him during training camp. I thought played real well in camp. Now, it's different when you're going up against a second-string, 13 offensive tackle than when you're in a live NFL game. That said, he's not, and I understand what you do in practice is how you get those reps in games. But it's hard to get, real productive pass rush reps when you're playing 7-8 snaps a game. I think that, and you saw with Derek Barnett inactive last week, I imagine Smith is going to continue to work his way up the rotation. I think Smith needs to start getting 15, 16 snaps a game, and then there will be a clearer picture of where he is at this juncture of his rookie season.
Eagles obviously won't get back on the practice field till later in the week, Zach, but this is a big one. Rematch of Super Bowl 57, Chiefs, Eagles, Monday Night Football. Eagles coming off a bye, you would think, hey, that's good. You get a little bit extra time for the coaching staff to prepare. But guess what? Andy Reid's coming off a bye. Nobody in the history of football is better coming off a bye week than Andy Reid. Nick Sirianni tapped into Andy Reid about how he prepares for bye weeks earlier in his tenure. Everybody wants the secret to what Andy Reid does. I say that I get the sense, and I want to see if you get the sense. I think Nick is fueled by other coaches who get their flowers from the media or whether it was Mike McDaniel and he was the flavor of the month, or Andy Reid, a certain future Hall of Famer. He's such a competitive guy. I think that fuels him. Do you get that same sense with Nick Sirianni?
Certainly, it's a good point. I think it's more relevant with your Sean McVay, Mike McDaniel, some of the young play calling types. Andy Reid's in a different
Yeah.
in a different tier. I think with Andy Reid, it's more he has such a big part of this organization. You look at the past 25 years, a lot of it was shaped by Andy Reid's thinking and Andy Reid's approach. I mean, Andy Reid was literally there for the construction of the NovaCare complex, right? So that's a big shadow, no pun intended, there that kind of looms within the organization. But I do think that Nick Sirianni, nationally and perhaps even locally, deserves a lot more credit. And a lot of credit seems to go to the play callers. And that is a big part of the success of the Rams over the years and the Dolphins now. But what Nick Sirianni does exceptionally well is be a head coach of a football team, right? He manages the team. He knows the personalities. He knows the locker room. He's situational football, getting them prepared Monday to Saturday. There's so much that goes into it that he does well, and that tends to get overlooked based on if you can call a good play on third and 8.
All right, this is one that I'm going to give the Eagles coaching staff credit for, basically since Sirianni came in. And it's something you don't want to do, but you have to do. And the Eagles haven't, I think, they've been good at it. Judging and being ready for the worst case scenario. If the Eagles lose a linebacker in the game on Sunday against the Kansas City Chiefs, who's coming in? I know it's a worst case scenario. You don't want to think about losing a linebacker since you just lost one last week with Dean going out. Christian Ellis going to come in and save the day. How did the Eagles man the linebacker position? We know who the two starters are going to be, but if there's an injury in game, where do they go, Zach Berman?
Yeah, they would go to Christian Ellis in that situation. And he's played meaningful special team snaps for them. He's gotten some defensive work, but let that be your biggest problem, who your backup linebacker is. I remember talking to someone in that building one time going into a year after the Super Bowl, and I was saying, what are you doing about depth at this spot? And he said to me, if depth at that spot's our biggest problem, then we have a damn good roster. And I think that's the case here. So yeah, I understand the question with Dean being down. It would be Christian Ellis. But if you're counting on your backup linebacker saving the day, then you probably aren't a good enough team elsewhere. I think with the way their pass rush is and the way their corners are, that's the way this defense is built, and that's what they need to rely on.
But just let me add this: it's Andy Reid. Some coaches I wouldn't have a worry about that, but Andy Reid is that good that he's going to recognize where you are down a little bit, and he's going to try and take advantage. Some weeks I wouldn't worry about. You're right. Come on, it's linebacker. But against an Andy Reid coach team, you got to be careful with that stuff because he'll find a way to take advantage of you. Just
at ZBerm, make sure you follow Zach on Twitter. That hasn't changed, but you can read him now at allphilly.com. Does a tremendous job there. He and our buddy Bo Wolf still have the podcast as well, the Philly Eagles podcast. You can watch that daily. Yeah, it's difficult. How about doing that every day, Zach?
Yeah, learning from you guys for sure.
I from the perspective you just mentioned, and you're right. If you're worried about backup linebacker, that's kind of what we do. We always, because this team is so good. Has this validated Howie's philosophy of devaluing certain positions, linebacker, running back, most notably, at least asset wise, versus building offensive front, defensive front? Obviously, you need the quarterback. It's a copycat league. Everybody says that. Why don't more teams copy what the Eagles do when it comes to foundational building of a roster?
It's a great question. I would say maybe it's public pressure. Maybe it's because it's not the sexy pick on draft day sometimes when you take another offensive tackle or you take another interior defensive lineman. But the reality is it bears itself out. I mean, we've seen over the past 25 years, frankly, but especially in these past few years, that when the Eagles close out games, it's with their pass rush. And every year around draft time, there's a speculation. Are they going to draft this running back? Are they going to draft this linebacker? I'm always saying, like, history's your guide here. History's your guide. They're going to take the guy on the O line. They're going to take the guy on the D line. And I think it's worked well for them.
And oh, by the way, other teams have actually tried. They just don't pick the right guys. The Eagles almost always pick the right guys, which Howie should get credit for as well. Z Berm, we appreciate you jumping back into the fray today. Give Mr. Wolf our regards. Thank you very much. All the luck with the new venture, bud. And we appreciate you hopping on Birds 365.
I appreciate that. If I can throw in something real quick for 10 seconds, I know Derek Gunn's on your network here. D Gunn has had a big part in my career. I was on TV with him for 6 years. I'm thinking of him and his family right now, and I just wanted to make sure I put that out there. Thanks for having me on.
Zach. Appreciate that. And for those who want to help D Gunn, GoFundMe, make sure you search on Derek Gunn. Obviously, his wife has a difficult road ahead, and we're all thinking of D Gunn. But that's the kind of guy Zach Berman is, man. He sneaks that in there.
Yeah,
he does it. And that's why if Zach's a minute late, I'm worried. You know, because he's never late to anything.
Tom Coughlin would have fined him, but we're going to cut him some slack because we're just not that hard ass as some others are. But thank you, Zach, for coming on. And yes, thank you again for putting out the well wishes for our guy, D Gunn. Appreciate whatever Zach hops on. Looking forward to getting him again coming on down the road. We thank Jeff Kerr from hopping on earlier today. I'm going to be here tomorrow, McMullen. We'll be less than a week from an actual game. Are the Eagles ever going to play? It seems like forever since the Eagles played. They are going to play.